Higgins from the Land Design Studio. I won't say too much about Peter because he'll do a very good job of introducing himself. I met Peter a number of years ago now, actually, and first got to know him when UWE magazine asked me to write a profile on him. And so having got in touch with Peter said to me, well, you better come to Berlin with me. So we went to Berlin and looked at one of his emerging projects and so on. I spent a long time with Peter, talking to him about his work. And this is probably a good decade ago, so his work has moved on since then. He trained from memory at the AA, he's worked for the BBC, he worked at Imagination, he set up his own practice, Land Design Studio, which covers a broad range of design practice. And I think that's the appeal of Peter today for you. So it's very difficult to quantify Peter and his work and his collaborations with other people. He's sort of architect, designer, spatial designer, narrative designer, works across boundaries. So as Peter's talking, I just tried to think about his work within that sort of framework of being quite difficult to pigeonhole. And a lot of the work that we'll be talking about is very much to do with collaboration. So it's not, he can jump in to correct me if he doesn't agree. But I guess a lot of the credit for the ideas very much was said to be Peter's, but the kind of executive making of them is to do with his chosen collaborators, whether he works with technologists or multimedia technologists, theatre practitioners, planners and so on. So it's through a sort of a web of links through which Peter creates his work. Okay, Peter, over to you.
Thanks, David. Thank you. I mean, I just took a photograph. I mean, this is just great. It's your lunchtime you're doing here. But thank you so much. It's really great, when you get such a kind of healthy attendance. Now, I have a tradition of having far too many slides, usually twice the number I need. So bear with me. The first bit, what is the first bit about? It's about a personal context, and there's a Venn diagram that took me 10 years to draw, and it's about these things. It's about these four things, which is where is it, which is about architecture. What's the story? Why do we tell it? Is the narrative thing. How do we tell it? Is the communication media. And who's it for? Know your audience, the user experience, as it's now known as. So when you put all these four things together, you suddenly find that the discipline crosses the line of academic disciplines. There are four different disciplines there that all kind of coalesce and become one discipline, which has always interested me. I got interested, first of all, in the environment or in town planning by being brought up in a new town, Crawley, just near Gatwick. And it was an experiment in town planning. That was my school, named after the town architect, Sir Thomas Bennett, and it lasted 50 years. Not so good for Sir Thomas Bennett, was it? It was an awful building. And then I slipped in under the radar to the Architectural Association. I cannot tell you how. I was completely the wild card because I'd never studied art. I had no portfolio. I was a mod, I was into music and fashion, and maybe they thought we can do one of them in the year. And this was a year before, these were years before Nigel Coates was did. And I was taught by Archigram, so there you go. I mean, you just don't know. You're in a moment of cultural history which is extraordinary, but you don't know at the time that you're in that moment swinging London and everything that went with it. It was an extraordinary period. I worked for an architect for about a year. There was no work, and I ended up going to work for BBC Television as a holiday relief assistant for 6 months and stayed for 10 years. And here's one of my projects where we added a piece to the school, and then we burnt it down, and Tim Roth came running out on fire at that bit there. So there's all those years of studying architecture, and then what I'm doing is burning down second-rate buildings. So there you go. But it was an extraordinary time, and I enjoyed it a lot, and I worked in the theatre, in West End Theatre. You could do both at the BBC. You could really slip and slide and do other things. And working for the theatre was fabulous. It's 500 sets of eyes instead of one, which is what television and film's about. Very different designing for the theatre. I then worked for Imagination. I got headhunted and hijacked and had to wear a suit, go to Covent Garden every day, and I really hated it. I really, really hated it. But this is what they did. They would take people down a corridor into an environment, 30-metre diameter dome, and then they'd lift it in the air, and you'd just disappear to the side to see an exhibition about British Telecom and Ford. So I was there for 4 years. But at the end of the day, this introduction is about script or brief. It's about the written word, and it's about a brief is something that's written prosaically by a client, and the script is something that you develop as a creative person. And as a designer, responding to a script or a brief is a very, very different thing. So in practice, I just want to touch on this. You're like a football manager. You search out the talent. You have to have a good time. You have to have mentors. I have mentors. And chuck away things that fail. Don't worry about failure. You will fail. And there are lots of traps. So the talent, I must admit, I've taught a lot over 15 years, mostly external examining at Manchester, Leeds, Brighton, and I taught at Kingston, external at Kingston, and then Central Societies. And then loads of talks like this. So I've met a lot of talent. This is something, Robin Clark, who works with us now, this was Robin making models at Royal College, where he would put a kind of Dago iridescent paint on them and rewrite them. And, you know, I mean, this is all analog. And then you get cracking pieces of work, which are, you will understand, that's a cracking piece of work. Ian McFadden, who I met at Kingston, did storyboards to die for. He could have worked in Hollywood as a storyboard artist, and we hijacked him. And then interior designers doing graphics, which is not always easy, but actually there's an eye and there's a skill there, and we appreciate it. This was a show at Brighton, beautiful show put together, and it had a real sense of place, and it's inside the old fruit and veg. And here we are, this is our studio having a laugh, winning a BAFTA, getting some awards, going on the beach, playing football, and here we are again, John, Royal College, Catherine, Kingston, it's me, it's Yona from Berlin, and then the Central Martins, Simon from Leeds, Robin, Royal College, environments at Central St Martins. So, where do we work? That's about the talent, where we find people and how people are important to us, and how I've been very lucky. The universities, the design schools have provided a source of talent for me. You know, I've never employed anybody from an agency who brings me up and says, we've got some people to come and see. I go and see them, I like them, and we hire them, and they work for us. And it's unbelievable. There must be, I don't know, I've given up counting, but it's been a really good way of doing things. And then we started working on a desk and a telephone, a drawing board and a telephone. We get bigger, we get bigger. We work with Foster's, that's Foster's. Now we go to Foster's for a meeting. Biggest architectural practice, I think, probably in the world. We're very happy to sit at the top table with Foster's. And we're also very happy to go to the BFI, the NUGO, and have a meeting here with Skype, and a bit of Wi-Fi, and that's really nice. And this is happening now. Workplace is changing dramatically. The Observer had a great piece on work a few weeks ago, and the headline was, my father had one job, my grandfather had one job, my father had 6 jobs, and I've got 6 jobs at a time. The workplace is changing phenomenally, and where are we going to work? I love that. What does it say? It says, Antonov Design Bureau. What does that mean? It's so James Bond. These are my mentors, 3 of them. There are a lot more than this. Met him at the BBC, Tony Abbott, Fox, who was at the AA. He hunted me down at the BBC because I was at the AA, and that was a good connection, good enough for him. He was given his year prize by Frank Lloyd Wright at the AA, and he had a military cross from the Second World War. So he was pretty special. James Wines, older members of the staff that may know James Wines, a company called Sight Sculpture in the Environment, who I got to meet and work with. Delightful man, was a sculptor, builds architecture. And Terence Donovan there, photographer, who I met, and I had a lovely time with Terence. He's taken a photograph of Lady Diana, who was very grumpy, and he took a £5 note out of his pocket and he folded it up and put it in the top of the camera. And he said to her, smile at your mother-in-law. Broke the ice. These are the traps, project managers, a big trap. Meetings, agendas, the minutes, big trap. I'm sure I'm not meant to say this at all. You're all doing professional practice, and it's all about minutes, meetings, and agendas. It sucks the oxygen out of the room. Only I said that, nobody else said that. So you can blame me, and you refuse to do it. It is global, we do meetings everywhere. Beware of politicians and local authorities. This is a project we did at Sutton, which was a life centre. I've got it later. And here are the people that were just taking the kind of accolade with Nick Clegg. You know, a real celebrity arrived. And I just love that screen grab. Her name, that summed it up. They were nobodies, you know. And all the people that made it were standing and watching where everybody got slapped on the back and told how clever they were. But what really bugged me was when Nick Clegg, there he is, he actually hijacked our project and said it was all to do with the new policies of the coalition. I can't even remember what it was called. Can you remember what it was called? Some sort of social agenda. And anyway, he said, here are the kids that wrote the script. Here they are, coming to tell us how they developed this life centre, this wonderful project for 2 years. I had never seen these in my life. They had nothing to do with it. We were hijacked. This is the National Football Museum. That's the kind of palimpsest of the National Football Museum that moved from Preston to Manchester. Political gesture. They ripped the heart out of it and took it to Manchester because it suited them. It's the big city thing. And beware of pitching for lost causes. Guess what this is? If you can read it up there. This was us pitching for the National Football Museum in Germany. Now, are we ever going to win that job? And why did we bother? We lost on penalties. And that's us pitching for an Adidas experience against an advertising agency called Fallon. And why did we ever do it? You know, we have a sixth sense when we say, should we be doing this? You know, we're pitching against a big advertising agency. When they gave you their card, it said, we are Fallon. That was on their card. And we pitched, and we didn't win it, and they didn't win it, and it was a complete waste of our resources, time and money. And then beware of clients that are Gucci and Rolex and the rest. So be careful. And, most important thing, beware and destroy failure. Throw it away. You know, don't squirrel it into a corner. I'm really bad at this. But that was us clearing our store. We had a store that cost us £35,000 over 10, 15 years. And when we cleared it, it was just full of crap. You know? We just hung on to £35,000 and none of it was of any value to us at all. So there's a lesson to be learned. David was a journalist, I think a good journalist, but I had an off-the-record conversation with somebody from BD, where you worked, and it ended up in the Manchester Evening News editorial. What I'd said, off the record, I don't think this is going to work, and then it went, so to speak, viral, and we were in trouble. It was litigation, it was the council, it was solicitors, big, big trouble. And my partner is also my wife, and I got slapped, I can tell you. We got away with it in the end. And that was nervous, and the irony was we won awards, and we did pretty well out of it. But it was going to fail, and it closed within a year. And when it closed, the Manchester Evening News rang me up, and they said, is there anything you'd like to say? Because what you predicted has actually happened. And the second word was off. And beware presenting. This is about presenting. I do a lot of presenting. I actually quite enjoy it. You all will have to do it, whether you like it or not. It's a skill to be acquired. You do it through practice, practice, practice. But you get caught out. This was in Goa. This was an audience of 1,200 people. And I was presenting after somebody called Irma Boom, who is a book designer from the Netherlands. And she's good, okay? I realised, having flown to India, that I was in the wrong conference. I was doing a talk about this stuff, and everybody there was from agencies, advertising, graphics, branding, and I was in the wrong place. Somehow or other, somebody checked me out and thought I was doing something, and I was wrong. And when you have to follow Irma Boom, and I don't know what you can see here, but Irma, who's a book designer, she had you see there's a cameraman there, standing on a desk behind her, and she had her books on the desk, and she opened the books, and the whole presentation was done opening the books and flicking through the books. No slides, it was all live, it was all analog, of her saying, oh yeah, I'll show you something else, and flick, 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 and she went to another page. Fantastic, wonderful, and I'm following this woman. It's really scary. This speaks for itself. I mean, I just saw this at the Venice Biennale. Exquisite. fabulous, fabulous. And what it's about, I know you're all smiling now, I didn't know there were that many architects. But what that was about, and what it said was, the bandwidth of the world is greater than the internet. And you know what I mean. It was a live performance. I walked in, I saw it. It's the same with theatre. It's the same with many, many, many things. The moment of experience and real time, real place, real people is fundamental. So beware of scary architects. He's pretty scary. He's from Taiwan. Okay, who makes narrative space? There's a segue here. These are people that really interest me, who whose work I really love, and I think are exceptional. And I can't go into any detail. I love this, homage to Frank Lloyd Wright is Lego. I mean, how good is that? How good was that? And I can give my son falling water to make, and he makes it. And he says, this is pretty cool. This is good. He made falling water. Pay, you know that pyramid? I mean, when I first saw it, I thought, oh shit, But, I took this photograph, and this section, the culture and the commercial, that way of actually responding to the fact that if the culture needs to survive, then it needs to have the support of the cultural initiatives. Just look at all our national museums now. They're all big shops, They have big events, they have big touring exhibitions, they're all doing it. The cultural has entered that world. He's a genius. I really recommend you to go and visit this in Milan, opened last year. It's just the way he handles the materials, the materiality of his work is second to none. And most of it, as you probably know, is very, very simple and cheap and utilitarian. And he's still cool enough to allow Wes Anderson to design the cafe. Why not? It's a great cafe. Dylan Scafidio, this was the Swiss Expo. This is a building, a cloud made of mist. Grimshaw and Anthony Hunt, Eden. I mean, Tim Schmidt, when he drove this, he came from rock and roll, and it was only somebody really extraordinary that could have ever made this happen, flying over the corner in a helicopter, looking for a site, a contaminated site, cleaning the site out, putting these great structures in, and telling the story of our ecologies, and using mist like Dylan Scafidio. He made environments that did things, and they're dry environments and wet environments, and they did. Anthony Hunt and Grimshaw, a real collaboration. You cannot say this is a piece of architecture, it's a collaboration. This is a piece from James Wines. We pitched with him, Museum of Islamic Arts in Doha, and it was completely rigged. Nobody won it, and then they just gave it to Ryan Pay. And then Wilkinson Air, this won a Sterling Prize. And as Jim Eyre said, I'm not sure a building can win a Sterling Prize if it doesn't have a toilet. It doesn't have a toilet, but it won a Sterling. And it captured everybody's imagination because it connected two sides of the river. And it's a pretty interesting piece of engineering. And it's interesting, isn't it? I took this photograph on the night of the England-France game, which was a fabulous moment. And I just thought, how good, that nobody ever imagined that arch was going to be used in such a powerful way through lighting. When Foster designed this, they never ever said, if there's a disaster in France, we can put the tricolour up. Nobody ever said that, but it lent itself to it. It was appropriate, and I just love that moment. It was a really special moment. And sorry, I support Chelsea, and apologies for that. I'm sure he must be the odd person that does. Herzog de Meuron doing a great job, and my God, this is a really weird stadium, and it's brick. And it's got historic kind of references in it. I won't go into it. It's very exciting. This guy is very exciting, Carlo Scarpa. But this is Castelvecchio in Italy, which is the most magnificent combination of architecture and museum where he's knitted together those two things. This is about architects making an exhibition. This is Pay and Ralph Applebaum, who are the exhibition designers. This is in Washington, and it has the narrative, it has these kind of driven perspectives. Reminds you of Auschwitz and the metalwork of the gas ovens and the referencing of the architectural materiality is chilling, And this is where you walk through a village that was exterminated, and you walk through it at two levels, and there's a photograph of every family from the village. So the architects and the exhibition designer have collaborated to make what is a memorable, emotional experience. This is in Paris. This is the Natural History Museum, the National Museum of Natural History. And here they are, the animals. I mean, totally politically incorrect stuffed animals and Noah's Ark on the ground, and then the fish are in the basement, and then the birds are high up, you know. I mean, it's a Victorian building, but they've actually laid a story through objects, the architects. And I apologise not having their name. I don't know if is it finished? It finishes Sunday. This is a good show. It's not actually well designed, but these are clever people. And they were architects that turned into storytellers, and they made film. This is about engineering, and there's something about Mazda, which is a science research centre in Abu Dhabi, which is fantastic. The buildings are all kind of doing something to do with energy. They're either cooling, or they're collecting solar, or they have kind of really interesting facades that do with the whole solar. They're making kind of very narrow corridors, and they're moving air around in a really interesting way. And it's a kind of piece of town planning. It's only one block, but it's a piece of town planning that's driven by the environmental care. Paletti, he actually commissioned all of the tube stations on the Jubilee line. And if you go to them, they're spectacular. They're different because he curated the architecture. He chose every architect. And he said, as soon as the building comes to ground level, I want architects to take over because the engineers do the stuff down there. And that's what he did. As soon as daylight comes into the building, he wants the architect to take over. So the celebration of daylight. Kapoor and Valmont, this is a great piece from the Tate, and Valmont made it happen because he's a great engineer. And that's a great piece of engineering. It's a sense of arrival. Transport interchanges have a great kind of emotional draw. And I think, you know, that when you get the combination of the engineer and the architect, again, it can be very special. Gardens by the Bay Singapore, which we worked on actually with Andrew Grant, who's in Bath, Wilkinson Air, Atelier 1, Atelier 10, 4, and us as well, 5 UK practices. And this is increasing the dwell time in Singapore by half a day. And it's about ecology and horticulture. And these are super trees designed by Neil Thomas that grow, that collect solar and distribute heat from the biomes and collect water. They do everything and they grow, and they're a cafe, and they're just magnificent. And inside one of the conservatories, we did a big show about if the Earth increases its temperature by 5 degrees. So it was a big immersive show. This is about events. This is the Santa's Elephant. This is about Artichoke, who also did this a few weeks ago. Did anybody see this in London at all? Any of the light show in London, which was great. London came to a standstill at 6 o'clock, and the streets were filled, and everybody was wandering around looking at lighting installations. It was extraordinary. And I stumbled on this in Blackpool. It's a Chinese group that made these things out like coat hangers and silk. They were beautiful. Lyson, who's a genius artist, as you all know probably, that was only half a sun. And all of that was parasol. It was a mirrored ceiling. People just laid on the floor. Probably the best piece to be in the Tate. And this was the poppies at the Tower of London, which was an art piece, really. And how clever it was that everybody bought the poppies afterwards. So it's a kind of sustainable piece of art that paid for itself. And it was absolutely mobbed. You know, film, you know, narrative storytelling, somebody like Kubrick working with Ken Adam, his production designer, and the whole way that film is made and the relationship of director to designer. This is very special for lots of reasons, why this is so good. And Kubrick was a genius, and every film he made was different. And he worked with his designers in such a way. And this is a piece of theatre, Dryden and Dudley, and this was about soldiers that went to the First World War. And all the seating block, that seating block moved with the soldiers as they marched towards the trenches, and they crawled underneath the laser lights of the marsh gas. And then when they got shot, they were picked up by the Angel of Mons, who was a character that came from the flies, and picked them up and took them away. This is a piece of kinetic theatre. And all I do is urge you. Theatre is a great source of inspiration. The Nether in London, you know, there's stuff going on all the time that is just spectacular. And you have to embrace it. You really do. There's some graphics here, Why Not Associates? All one-liners. This is in Blackpool. These are kind of funny jokes, and it just makes up what they call a comedy carpet. How brave was that? Blackpool should commission that. And Why Not Associates? Best in the business, for those that know. There's Arno Hemmer, who made... this was in Plaza Mayor in Mexico City. And here you could get online and you could point the searchlights for a minute or so, and you could make a shape, and everybody could enjoy it. And you were in Australia. Okay, this was the millennium. This was 2000. It's a long time ago, and it was a spectacular piece. Okay, so that gets us to land. Galloping a bit, I'm afraid, but there you go. Land Design Studio. Okay, we do interior design. We have interior designers. We don't do much interior design. Things come upon us. We did some work at Christie's, which is very kind of corporate, and the brand Christie's is all right. And just to say, we do it. We don't do much of it, and it's all right. I don't do it at all. And just knowing how to hang paintings and light paintings and create spaces, and we did use some of our media, so we used it. And then we did Eurostyle Lounge at St Pancras. And we used a lot of media here. We allowed you to kind of investigate paintings from a kind of coffee table, and also to investigate the journeys on almost like a big kind of tablet or iPhone. So we used a bit of media, but a very difficult brief because it's all about people. And it's about need states. It's about what are people thinking as they're about to get on the train. That's what that job was about. I can't go into it, but that's what it was about. But we had to choose some furniture, choose some fabrics, choose some lighting, choose some finishes, all those things that we're expected to do as an interior designer architect. An architectural mechanism that plays over the Millennium Dome, which was in 2000. And this was, we designed it, and we could make it fit for purpose. It's probably the only thing we've done at scale. It wasn't acknowledged because the dome was a failure, perceived to be a failure. But what we did is we made a structure that had all these cones, and we back projected big screens on all the cones, and we moved people down the system, and we got 30,000 people a day through this space. And we introduced people to the concept of digital play. And this was in 2000. So this is, what this is? That thing that you move the ball bearing? And you move the ball bearing analog and it goes into a hole. Well, this is a digital version of it, where you actually move the ball bearing just by where you position it on the matrix, and the ball bearing moves in a digital way, and you have to negotiate it to the end. It's quite difficult to do, actually. It's a digital version. And this was a piece by a Japanese artist called Toshio Iwai. This was making the sound, and this was force feedback, where you could actually pull on a sort of war rope against a character, different characters, different strengths, and it pulled back against you. So the Millennium Dome was for us a kind of breakthrough. We got the hang of digital, and we started to drive it on and use it. So the famous grouse experience. This was going to be, we were going to reference the campaign of Alan Vickers. We were going to use some of our knowledge and understanding of digital media. And we were going to appropriate a cottage, this cottage, which was really high, so we could do this really nice vertical projection. And we could create this floor that actually would respond to your movement on it through seismic sensors. And we made the rest of the materials. So the idea here was that through seismic sensors we can change we can allow you to respond to the floor. This was in 2003. It kind of goes on. Get that. Architecture as media. This always interested me. This was the Futures Gallery. And our task was to anticipate the future. So, create an immersive space surrounded by the internet, if you like. Again, this was very early in 2000, 2002. And then what we would do is we'd have midground objects and foreground screens. So you could intervene with the ubiquitous internet. You could suck stories, and then you could also look at objects. So the object became part of the whole process. It's quite a nice plan. And so that was the kind of system. And if you get that. So there were kind of objects, and you could choose those objects, and you could draw the story down into there you go. So there's objects about this pill that passes through the body and has a camera in it. So background, streaming, foreground you can interpret, and midground is the object. Okay? So it was as far as we were concerned, a complete breakthrough in interpretation or space making, but it actually treated the space. That's all about scanning the body and how what different methods there are of scanning the body and why you use those different methods. So our characters on the background are interpreting objects in the middle and the foreground screen. So media as architecture. Then these educational experiences, these came upon us really, and I was really pleased to be able to play with our skills and challenge the national curriculum. And we did two. We did one in Tower Hamlets, which is about cellular biology. And this is for kids in Tower Hamlets who many of them don't have English as the first language. But it's set within a very, very high-end laboratory. This is a Will Alsop structure in QMUL, Queen Mary's University, London. And this is a laboratory that's a really high-end laboratory about infectious diseases. So the kids come into the laboratory, and we're trying to encourage them to think about studying science. And this is at age year 6, I think. This is 11 or something like that. So there's a structure. We had to, Will also put a floor in, which we had to rip out at great expense because it wasn't big enough. And we just had a pod in the middle, cellular structure in the middle. And we had a really big audio-visual rig that we could play with. And we could tell stories, and we could open the pod, and we could use the pod and all the surrounding media to take children through a 1-hour experience that allowed them to look at their body, the cellular structure of their body, and understand things like why they should clean their teeth, what is a burn, what is a football injury, what is cancer, all those things read through cellular biology by using media, the sort of things they don't get at school and things that are really hard to learn at school. This is so different. And I don't know whether you ever did PHSE at school on a Friday afternoon. And this was where these were the people that claimed that the two kids had invented it. Remember that photo? Anyway, we worked on it for 2 years. And it was a library, and we were at the back of the library, and we actually worked with the architects to make a purpose-built space where we could take actually 90 kids, 3 classes, through this mechanism, and we could give them a kind of introduction to aspects of PHSE through a media environment, okay? So we dealt with some we did a big storyboard number, we did loads and loads of research. We talked to criminals, we talked to police, we talked to the fire brigade, we talked to beat bullying, all sorts of people that fall off the edge, or kids, that know about those areas that kids can fall off the edge. So the idea here was to give kids an introduction to all these aspects of their lives that challenge their safety. And at the end, they could take away a little card that has all the connections and the numbers, so they can put it in their pocket and they can ring people, childcare or whatever, so that they can discreetly find out more. It's about domestic violence as well. And if your mum is being beaten up by your drunken dad, you need to know you can go somewhere. And so here's the environment, some images of it, and there's a movie, which I'll scroll through.
Hello, welcome to the Sutherland Life Centre. I'm Dina. Hang on a minute, I think I'll just pop up there to get a better view of you all. In a few minutes, you'll be taking a unique journey through the challenges and dilemmas of life, growing up, and the world around you. But first, I'm going to give you a sneak preview of the entire experience. The centre has 4 zones. These are the street, the transport, the home, and the virtual experience. Right now, we're in the street experience.
Where did you get this stuff from? Oh, around the corner. This guy's great. Do you want to try?
These are 4 sides, these characters.
We could all choose to stay out of trouble. We could all choose to say no. But what would you choose?
The graphics were done by Gavin, who I met at Brighton.
Fear can lead us to smart choices like running away from danger or phoning for help, but fear can lead to dangerous choices like carrying a weapon.
Come on, give it back. What are you going to do about it? I've heard about this a lot. And that's why my friend told me to come here live. Or maybe I should just run and get help.
Next door to the street experience, on your left is the transport experience. Inside are...
So, yeah, I mean, the trouble is that transport experiences using like CCTV image to actually raise the issue of how you should behave on transport, because these kids are just starting to use transport.
Here you'll find yourself in the middle of a digital immersive environment like
So this is a surrounding environment where we can look at hazards in the environment, in the city, arson, and we can look at waste management, and we can look at deforestation, and we can look at water, and then we take kids into a kitchen where we have a radio running, and they're looking at the newspaper and they're understanding
in the dining
about
room,
their diet.
gather
This is
around the
really
table
important.
to be with a family
This
having their
is
evening meal.
Enough! No more excuses!
It's not your fault. Don't cry. Mum's just upset because Dad's angry. Do some colouring. You like that?
It really scares me and I just want it to stop.
My name's Jack. You're in my bedroom and this is my story. Something that happened to me last year. So gather around the computer screens and I'll show you.
Yeah, that's
These are my year 6 friends.
cyberbullying, you know, we know about that and it's a big deal.
Serious
And then at the end
consequence is
we
arrest.
reprise everything, bring everybody back into the main space.
Supporting family and friends.
This is
You'll
like
be
a
given
billboard on the
information to
street.
take away, full of useful websites, email addresses and phone numbers. There are loads of ways to find out more about what you've seen and heard today, and lots of people to talk to, if you want, for support and advice 24 hours a day. When you leave, think about what you've seen, and remember, it's your life. It's your choices that make the difference. Choose well, be safe, and be happy.
Okay, transformation of gallery space. Well, I guess if you say, who are we, what are we, we're exhibition designers. By the way, I hate that expression. We're not exhibition designers, we're experiential designers. But that's what my mum thinks we are, not experiential. And this is kind of bread and butter stuff. You know, going into the British Museum in the reading room, which is completely an impossible space to work in, a huge dome structure, that thing there. And building an exhibition about Pompeii, Herculaneum. And I went back to my kind of roots as a theatre or a television designer and made a kind of a movie set, if you like, because the idea here was that we were in a Roman villa just about 10 hours before the tragedy, and that we just reconstructed it with all the objects in the right places. So we had to build a orthogonal structure with the right sort of proportions. We didn't have the money to do a movie set, but we just had to make an atrium where all the objects of status and the worldly things that would be known by the person that lived in the villa were displayed. And in the bedroom there's a crib there, a child crib, and things to do with perfume and actually the sexual act, which was, of course, they were very liberal about that. They used to have their slaves watching them, there were frescoes showing that. And then the garden space, and then the living space, and then the kitchen space down the end. So we just tried to kind of create the atmospheric environment from space to space, telling the story through the objects in the correct spaces. But instead of just painting the wall a colour, if you go to a Turner exhibition, it's like which shade of Farrow and Ball you want. We actually made architecture. And that's the casts, you know, that you don't know are there. These are the people that died in the plaster casts were made. They're very, you know, they're very, very emotional. And we were very careful about, actually we did turn that into a gallery experience, but it was a surprise. We held it back and we didn't know it was there. So that's us kind of creating architecture within an incredibly inappropriate space, really. And we had to put lighting in and all sorts of things. And then we had to do the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which actually was before this. So this was about a labyrinth and then a great big object at the end. So taking the same space and applying a very different architectural solution. We had to display a 38-metre long papyrus at the end. At the Natural History Museum, just two comparisons. This is about Ice Station Antarctica. It was going to go on tour, and so we decided that we would actually use inflatable structures so that we could deflate them and then they could travel the world. A very, very cheap solution, and also gave the kind of atmosphere and the lighting opportunity to tell the story, mainly for children. And it's sort of based on the idea that, are you up to become an explorer in Antarctica? That was the kind of notion of the narrative of the story. And then in the same space, for a very different audience, Scott's last expedition. What's interesting here is in this space there's a table. This is on the ice. This is still there. Okay, this space is still on the ice with all this stuff in it. And we thought we were going to get that table, and that's the plan. And then we realised, and this is Dogville, Lars von Trier film, and this was our starting point. So we love this film. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a fantastic film. It's shot like in a rehearsal space. And you believe it, there's markings on the floor and a few bits of furniture. And you're in there. You're in this kind of hokey village where there's all sorts of weird things going on. And it's a great film. And we used this was our reference point. So we managed to fit the hut in, so we could get the hut to fit here. And we tell a pre-story and a post-story where the hut fitted. And then we marked the floor. And everything was marked accurately to scale. And the table became a digital surface where we could show what people ate, show the maps they looked at, the letters they wrote, all sorts of things were reenacted on that table. So although we didn't get the table in the end, we thought we were going to, and that would have been really fabulous, but we didn't. But we used that table to tell a story. And then there was Henry Ponting was the photographer, and he took some beautiful black and white photography and some film. So we used that, and here's the narrative of the hut, just in a kind of T&G, deconstructed, with the floors marked, and the objects being kind of heroes, if you like. So very deconstructed, using objects as heroes, using photography, and then the rest of the setting, if you like, was just this deconstructed hut. So permanent exhibitions working with architects, Long and Kentish in Cornwall, where we had a collection of small boats, and this was a really close collaboration for 5 years. And we made a model showing that we couldn't fit all the boats in, so we rehung the collection. And what was really nice about it working, that was MJ Long's section, beautiful image that represented our thinking over 2 or 3 years. And then we hung the boats, and everything's directional, everything's going in and coming out from sea. And even, and that was a dark space, and even a collection of models were coming in and going out in the same direction on an axis. And of course the new director comes in and turns everything at an angle and destroys the whole concept, and that's what happens. And then you could go up and see the estuary, we could interpret that, or you could go down in the tower and you could interpret the tide. So the tower, MJ always wanted a kind of lighthouse tower, which I thought was a bit sort of cheesy, but we used it and we really exploited it. And then there's boating made to understand, we blow wind, you're able to understand the principles of sailing. And then what we did do, which was fundamental, was we saved the views. So when we were in a gallery, we closed the gallery so you were focused on the stories. And when you were in a public space like a cafe, public spaces, we celebrated the view. So we really controlled the fenestration. And that's what this was about. It was about absolute fenestration. And there's a bit of media here where we allowed you to understand the boats through winding the image of the boat into a screen. So you just used a boating winch, a boating handle to wind the boat you're interested in into your screen, and then it becomes a touchscreen. So you engage, it's about engagement. And then Wilkinson Eyre, Mary Rose, there is a kind of one-trick pony here, but again it was about collaboration. Mary Rose, that's what's left of it after it was lifted in 1985. That's what's left of it. And there's a story to be told, because all these objects have been preserved and collected. But we couldn't put them back into the hull, so we did a Damien Hirst, and we said, well, let's rebuild the hull here, put all the objects back in there. We can't put objects in there, we're still drying it and conserving it, and then you can walk between the two. So that's the trick, and that we would do all of the interpretation of the end galleries, and we had to work very hard on the movement system, so we were in charge of the interpretation and the movement system. They're the end galleries. And this is about found space. Again, what I just want to show you here is this is in a setting that exists. And what we did is we projected all over it. This was a kind of movie set that was built in the 80s. But what we did is we augmented it. And the most important part of it was here.
And she started in this is a mould loft. Look upon this floor. You see the lines upon it?
Yes, sir.
Somewhere in amongst those lines are the lines drawn upon this very floor for victory, laid down in 1759. Think of this floor as an enormous drawing board. Here, we take the plans for each ship that we construct and draw them upon this floor piece by piece.
So actually, Victory was drawing on that floor, okay? So because they had no other way, they had to draw the section through the hull, keep drawing it, make a template, and then take it to the dry dock and build the hull. That was the only way to do it. It's called the mould-off, and 150 warships were actually built through that mould-off. So us exploiting the projection on the floor actually has a resonance because it's where it happened. And then finally, we worked in Milan last year with Foster's on the UAE Pavilion, and we were really unbelievably able to work very closely with Foster's to organise the kind of narrative movement system. We were always going to have a movie, and we decided it should be a circular structure. We were going to evolve it, but we didn't in the end. And we were going to have a queuing ramp where we informed you, we entertained the queue, and then we had a kind of virtual tech talk at the end. So there were 3 sequences here. And we were able to inform, and Foster's acknowledged this, but what they did do is they then created the architectural form, as they would, and that was the architecture. This is a temporary structure, and it's been taken down and taken back to the UAE, because that looked that's the auditorium, a big 180-degree film projection, and then you pass through into the end space where this is kind of tech talk, and then finally, this is a movie that just shows you how
The Milan Expo ran for 6 months in 2015 and attracted 21 million visitors. 184 pavilions responded to the theme, Feeding the Planet, Energy for Life. The seamless UAE Pavilion, designed by Foster and Partners, created an aesthetic that was inspired by desert dunes. The immersive vertical canyon provided an evolving environment within which we introduced arrays of glass fins, featuring bespoke media cubes. The see-through cubes combined 3D kinetic models with augmented video effects and dynamic text. The expo theme of food and energy was a challenge, especially as the UAE has little arable land and is known for its oil reserves. Through research, we identified 24 important messages which were presented progressively as challenges and solutions. Our approach was always to demystify complex and sometimes surprising narratives for a primarily European family audience. Each scene lasted 45 seconds and was triggered by the proximity of the visitor, who could choose English or Italian text. Visitors were also able to engage with the stories using tablets and smartphones. Younger visitors could be entertained with augmented reality desert wildlife. The LED floor panels supported 4 complementary video sources, creating spectacular evening atmospheres. By reflecting traditional Emirati values of adaptability, sustainability and sharing, we were able to dispel misconceptions about the UAE and reveal the interplay between land, energy and water in the production of sustainable food. The complete 45-minute UAE Pavilion experience attracted 1.2 million visitors and was in the top 3 most popular pavilions.
That's it, really. And I'm not sure we had a responsibility to make him look good, but at the time we did, and the rest is history. Yeah. So thank you.